You're welcome back to The Pulse. Now, a new report by the International Monetary Fund is projecting that the economy will not witness much growth as forecasted governments for this year. The World Economic Outlook report released by the IMF in Washington, D.C. indicates that Ghana will record a growth rate of 4.5%, lower than the 5.4% that the Finance Minister Setekwe was looking at for this year, 2016. Let's now speak to Joy Business editor George Yafe, who's currently in Washington, D.C. for the IMF World Bank spring meetings. George, I'm looking at the time. I think it will be right if I say good morning to you, right?
You missed out on that one. It's good afternoon here in Washington,
Okay, great. Okay, no problem, George. Okay, so what's the basis of this projection by the IMF on Ghana's growth rate for this year?
Francis, as we speak today, we have about 189 members of the International Monetary Fund. Now, what they actually do is that they put together or they engage their men on the ground to do some projections and analysis with respect to how each economy will grow. And then they put together this report that they call the Economic Outlook. Now, basically, in the case of Ghana, if you go through the 2016 budget, the government is projecting that at the end of 2016, we'll end up having a growth rate of over 5%. To be specific, about 5.4%. But the fund believes that from their analysis and their own projection, it looks like government will just do about 4.5%. And that is why they have made this projection in the Economic Outlook report, which was released yesterday here in Washington, D.C., Francis.
Okay, George, for the benefits of those who are not business savvy, when you say 4.5 or 5.4% in the country's growth, what does that mean?
Now, when you're looking at economic growth, there are a lot of variables that you want to consider in terms of revenue approach, expenditure approach, production approach, and all those things. In terms of looking at an economy, what is the level of economic activities that are going on that we want to capture in terms of how much people are spending, or in terms of production when it comes to companies, industries, and individuals? So when you capture this thing and you find out the value terms, you want to compute that into percentages. So it gives you a fair idea that if economy is growing at 2% or 3% or even 5%, so let's say for a developing economy like Ghana, some people would say that the economy should be growing around 8-10%. Then you could conclude that there is a lot of economic activities taking place in the economy. That could mean that, Francis, if I'm a businessman and I want to bring my investment into Ghana, this figure, this projection, this percentage growth would tell me that there is a lot of engagement going on in economic Ghana. So when I put in my money, the returns will be good. It also gives an indication to government that there's a lot of production going on, people are spending, and therefore I can tax more to help get more money to actually grow the economy. It's an indication that, let's say, a lot of things are happening in the economy that will benefit you and I and then government as well.
Okay, so what are the implications of this announcement by the IMF on new or fresh investments that we're expecting in the country?
And for us, that's the big challenge. And again, if you engage a lot of people, the economists and all those things, they would tell you that one of our biggest challenges that we are facing as an economy is the skepticism. The fact that people still think that we are not out of the woods yet. People still think that we haven't gotten there yet in terms of things improving. And for those, a lot of offshore investors, those guys who buy our bonds anytime government issues a 3-year bond, a 5-year bond, would want to look at reports like this to say that, okay, things are picking up, so therefore I can bring in my investment. So for these reports like this, those investors who might say that, well, we are not out of the woods yet, so I should still sit on the fence. But Francis, last year we grew about 3.5%. And if this year we're doing about 4.5%, restricting ourselves with the IMF figures, then it means that there's some level of growth. But for a lot of people, the argument is that even if the fund is skeptical about the government's own numbers, then it means that, yes, the challenges are still there, and we still have to wait a while and see how things will go before, if you're a businessman, Francis, I react by bringing in those funds to invest in the economy.
Okay. Now, how does this outlook feed into the IMF program that the country is currently on? How do we juxtapose that new outlook as against the program we are on?
If you just want to restrict yourself to the numbers, last year we did 3.5. It means that, yes, of course, the economy is picking up. If you look at, and this whole argument about deficits and public debt, it's always a measure of the value of the economy. So if you look at when we calculate, if you use the expenditure approach in terms of measuring economic growth, and people are spending, government is spending, and all those things, and we see that as of now, the economy is worth about 133 billion. If the economy expands and in nominal terms, the value goes high, deficit is reduced, public debt is reduced, because you are always measuring it as against the value of the economy. So if the economy expands, it means it's good news. In looking at the program itself, Francis, it means that there's been some level of growth. Could we have had this growth without the IMF program? That is debatable. So some would say that the IMF program has contributed to some marginal growth in our economy. And that could mean that we are indeed on track. If you look at even 2017, the IMF's own projection, they're looking at us growing over 7%. That means that will be the biggest growth we have seen over the last 4 years. It means that for some people, the program is indeed working.
Okay.
And that if we should continue to the letter, we will indeed come out of our current challenges that we are facing with the economy.
George, briefly, we know that we are also learning here in the country that the finance minister is in the United States because of the kind of projections we're seeing. A lot of work is being done behind the scenes, so we get enough funding for all the major capital projects that were outlined for this year. How is that going? Do we have more details on that?
We don't find details on that one, but again, information we're picking up is that there's some push for some window to do some additional borrowing. And I don't know whether the fund would agree to that or not. But again, it's one of the reasons why they are here, to convince the fund that, listen, we need some flexibility in the program to do A, B, C, D, because the program is too tight. Okay. And we need some extra money to spend in critical areas.
All right.
You're right on that one, Francis.
All right. Okay. Thank you, George Yafi, for those details. Speaking to us live from Washington, D.C. at the IMF spring meetings in the United States of America. Let's now pick the thoughts of the minority spokesperson on finance, Anthony Akoto. So thank you, sir, for joining us here on the program. My colleague, George Yafi, in Washington, has just painted a picture for us of how things are looking, what government is doing in trying to convince the IMF to relax the program a bit so they can be able to meet the capital projects they projected for this year. What does this say about how we are running the economy today?
Let me take it from the issue about growth that there appears to be some debate about. You know, the IMF program, as I understand it, growth is really a residual. The IMF is not a growth-enhancing agency. So I'm not sure that the IMF we can worry about the growth. The question that's in all our minds is that how well is the energy situation going to change? How are businesses going to respond in the light of higher interest rates, higher taxes, and so forth and so on? So it is a measure of real economic activity, and that depends on things on the ground, so to speak. The oil projection that we may be producing new oil in 2017 is what is urging people to think that next year growth will be better. But there are other sectors of growth. Already in the first quarter, we have not completely recovered from the energy problem. Our businesses back to where they were, say, in 2014 or 2013? The answer is no. So what I worry about is the issue about the fact that they have an IMF program, but our borrowing seems to be going up as a ratio of GDP. Now, there's no question that in order to follow the IMF program, there's been a lot of fiscal consolidation. In simple terms, government is not spending as much. From the demand side, that affects GDP. Private sector investment is not as robust. Consumers are not consuming as much. So growth issue, I wouldn't worry too much. I think 3.5, 4.1, no big deal. I don't believe we are going to grow at 7% in 2017. It's not possible unless something dramatic happens. So we may be on track in terms of meeting the deficit numbers. It appears to be coming down a bit because government has been forced to slow down on its expenditure. That has an effect. Government is a big player in the market, so if businesses don't get paid and so forth, the government does not purchase, then that will also affect growth. Yeah, so we may be meeting the targets. I'll be surprised if the IMF will give them room to go and borrow more. In fact, on the contrary, I suspect that they may be advising the government to cut back the bond issue, raise up to 1 billion. They may be going down. The fact is that the borrow agreement is a medium-term arrangement. Some went through last year, and this year, those that could not go through, it's fixed. They are due for a third review in April, in the next 2 weeks after Washington. I don't think the IMF is going to change the program without looking at the results of the review, which is supposed to happen
2 weeks after the spring
from
meetings.
next week. Yes, it doesn't make sense. So I don't think anybody should think that the program can change. And then again, keep in mind, Parliament also approved the budget. The government can't go and agree with some numbers that are not in the budget.
All right.
My sense is that the government will probably come up with a supplementary budget, because if I look at the revenue numbers that came in the budget, it did not include those additional energy sector levy taxes. Government cannot spend that money without coming to Parliament. So by implication, there will have to be a new revised budget on the basis of new revenue.
And that is something we might have to wait to see how that pans out in Parliament when, per your projections, it is brought to the House. But thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts with us
thank you very much.
On this matter. Minority spokesperson on finance, Anthony Akoto, said there. That's for Ghana's economy, the projections by the IMF, and the thoughts of the minority on this matter. At this point, we'll go for a break. The sports coming your way here on the program. Stay with us.